They say money can't buy love, but what happens when love costs you everything? I saved a billionaire's life with my bare hands, became his world, then walked away from millions. This is why I chose my freedom over his fortune, and why it was the hardest decision I ever made. If you've ever wondered whether true love can survive when money and power get in the way, stay with me. This story will change how you think about relationships forever. Make sure to hit that like button if you believe love should never come with a price tag. You know those moments that split your life into before and after? Mine happened on a Tuesday evening that started like any other. I was 3 hours into my second straight shift at Downtown General, my feet screaming in these worn-out sneakers I couldn't afford to replace. The emergency room was chaos as usual, drunk college kids, car accident victims, and the usual parade of people whose lives had taken a sudden left turn. I was grabbing my fourth cup of terrible coffee when I heard the screech of tires, followed by that sickening crunch of metal meeting concrete. Through the glass doors, I saw smoke rising from what looked like an expensive car wrapped around a light pole. Without thinking, I dropped my coffee and ran outside, my training kicking in before my brain could catch up. The man behind the wheel was unconscious, blood trickling from his forehead. But it wasn't the blood that caught my attention first. It was everything else. His suit probably cost more than I made in 3 months. The watch on his wrist could have paid my student loans twice over. Even unconscious and bleeding, he looked like he belonged in a magazine, not crumpled in a smoking car on a Tuesday night. But none of that mattered because he wasn't breathing right. I checked his pulse, assessed his injuries, and did what I'd been trained to do. I stabilized his neck, cleared his airway, and stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. In those few minutes, holding this stranger's life in my hands, I had no idea I was about to save the man who would later try to save me from myself. When he woke up 12 hours later, the first thing he did was thank me. Not the doctor who stitched him up, not the surgeon who checked his head injury, me. The nurse who happened to be walking by when his world literally crashed. He asked for my name, and when I told him, he repeated it like he was trying to memorize it. "I'm not supposed to be here," he said, and I thought he meant the hospital. Later, I'd understand he meant alive. Apparently, he'd been driving to a meeting that would have made him another billion, but stress had made him careless. One moment of distraction, one text message, and suddenly he was face to face with his own mortality. What struck me most wasn't his gratitude. I got that from patients all the time. It was how surprised he seemed when I treated him like everyone else. I checked his vitals, brought him terrible hospital food, and made small talk about the weather. I didn't ask about his business, didn't hint around about money, didn't treat him like he was special. And you could see it in his eyes. When was the last time someone had done that? We talked during my rounds over the next 3 days. He told me about growing up lonely in boarding schools, about building his company from nothing, about how success had somehow made him more isolated than when he was poor. I told him about working 2 jobs to get through nursing school, about my family, who thought I was crazy for wanting to help people instead of making money, about finding purpose in the small moments of healing. There was something there between us, something real, not the usual patient-nurse dynamic, not the rich man meets poor girl story you see in movies. Just 2 people who recognized something in each other that we'd been missing in our own lives. The day before his discharge, he asked me to dinner, not in some grand, sweeping gesture with flowers and violins. He was nervous, stumbling over his words like a teenager asking someone to prom. "I know this might be inappropriate," he said, "but would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? I mean, if you're comfortable with that. I'd like to talk to you when I'm not hooked up to machines." I almost said no. Everything about it felt like crossing a line I'd never even thought about crossing. He lived in a world of private jets and charity galas, while I was still eating ramen noodles for dinner most nights. What could we possibly have in common outside these hospital walls? But there was something in his eyes when he asked. Not entitlement or expectation, just hope. the same vulnerability I'd seen when he was unconscious in that car. So I said yes to coffee, thinking it would be one awkward hour and then we'd both move on with our very different lives. That coffee turned into 4 hours of conversation that flowed like we'd known each other for years. We talked about books, about dreams we'd given up, about the weight of other people's expectations. He told me about board meetings where he felt like a fraud, and I told him about patients who died despite everything I did to save them. We were two people who'd been carrying heavy loads alone, suddenly finding someone who understood the weight. When he walked me to my car, my beat-up Honda next to his driver's pristine Mercedes, I realized we were standing at the edge of something that could change everything. Two different worlds, about to collide in ways neither of us could predict. And despite every logical reason to walk away, I was ready to see where this impossible thing might lead. Our second date was supposed to be dinner at a casual restaurant. Instead, he picked me up in a car that cost more than my annual salary and took me to a place where the menu didn't have prices. I spent the first 20 minutes trying not to stare at the other diners, all of whom looked like they'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. When the waiter brought us wine that was older than I was, I knew I was way out of my depth. But here's the thing about fairy tales. They're intoxicating. Suddenly, I was being treated like royalty everywhere we went. Reservations at impossible restaurants, front row seats to sold-out shows, weekend trips to places I'd only seen in travel magazines. He'd send flowers to the hospital where I worked, not roses, but these exotic arrangements that looked like art. My co-workers started calling me Cinderella, and honestly, I was starting to feel like her too. The gifts started small. A scarf because he noticed I was always cold during night shifts. Earrings that matched a dress I'd admired in a store window. But then they got bigger. A necklace that made me gasp when I opened the box. A purse that cost more than my rent. Each time I'd protest, and each time he'd say the same thing. I just want to take care of you. My family was over the moon. My mom, who'd worked 3 jobs to put me through school, kept asking when he was going to propose. My sister started hinting about being a bridesmaid. Everyone was so excited about my success, as if dating a rich man was an achievement in itself. And I'll be honest, part of me loved it. The security, the luxury, the way people looked at me differently when I walked into a room wearing a dress that cost more than my car. But late at night, when I was alone in my apartment surrounded by gifts I'd never asked for, I'd catch myself in the mirror and wonder if the woman looking back was still me. Moving into his mansion felt like stepping into a museum. Marble floors that echoed every footstep, rooms so big you could get lost, and art on the walls worth more than entire neighborhoods. He gave me my own wing, insisting I needed space to be comfortable. What he didn't realize was that all that space just made me feel more alone. The house was always perfectly clean, perfectly quiet, perfectly empty. He had staff for everything. People who cooked, cleaned, maintained, and managed. But none of them really knew him. They were polite, professional, and distant. After a while, I realized I was the only person in his life who actually saw him eat cereal straight from the box at midnight or laugh at stupid TV shows. That's when I began to understand the weight he carried. Behind all the success and money was a man who'd never learned how to let people close. His parents had shipped him off to boarding school when he was 7 because they were too busy building their own empire. Every relationship he'd ever had was transactional. People who wanted something from him, whether it was money, connections, or status. I became his safe harbor. The person he could be vulnerable with. The one who listened when he talked about the pressure of making decisions that affected thousands of employees. He'd come home stressed from board meetings and just want to lie with his head in my lap while I played with his hair. Those quiet moments, when he'd fall asleep trusting me to keep him safe, were when I fell deepest in love with him. But I also started to see how isolated his world was. Dinner parties, where everyone wanted something. charity events where he was more ATM than person, business meetings that never seemed to end. And slowly, I realized that in loving him, I was becoming isolated too. My world was shrinking to fit his, and I hadn't even noticed it happening. The changes started small, so subtle I almost missed them. A gentle suggestion that maybe I'd be more comfortable in designer clothes at his events. A casual comment about how my friends from the hospital might not understand his world. An offer to hire a stylist because he wanted me to feel confident in his social circles. At first, I thought he was being thoughtful. He'd grown up in this world and was trying to help me navigate it. When he suggested I cut back my hours at the hospital because I looked tired, I told myself he was worried about my health. When he offered to hire a personal trainer because he wanted me to have more energy, I convinced myself it was about self-care. But then came the bigger suggestions. Maybe I should consider a different career, something that would give me more flexibility to travel with him. Maybe I should think about going back to school for business, so I could understand his world better. Maybe I should consider not working at all, so I could focus on our relationship and the social obligations that came with it. My best friend from nursing school, Maya, was the first to call it out. We were having lunch, our first in months because I'd been too busy with his social calendar. And she looked at me across the table and said, "I miss the old you." When I asked what she meant, she said, "The you who used to have opinions about things other than which charity gala to attend." That night, I looked in my closet full of clothes I'd never chosen, at a schedule packed with events I'd never wanted to attend, and realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd made a decision without considering what he'd think first. When I brought it up with him, he seemed genuinely confused. He wasn't trying to control me, he said. He just wanted to share his world with me. Didn't I want to be part of his life? And that was the problem. Somewhere along the way, being part of his life had started to mean disappearing from my own. He proposed on a private beach in the Maldives, with a ring so big it looked like a small planet. The sunset was perfect, the champagne was flowing, and a photographer was hidden in the palm trees to capture every moment. It should have been the happiest moment of my life. Instead, I felt like I was watching someone else's fairy tale. The ring was stunning, a 5-carat diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like tiny stars. He'd had it custom-made, he said, because nothing ordinary was good enough for me. As he slipped it onto my finger, I felt the weight of it, and not just physically. This ring was worth more than my parents' house, more than everything I'd ever owned combined. But it was the prenup conversation that really opened my eyes. His lawyers had already drawn it up, he explained casually over breakfast the next morning. Standard procedure, he said, nothing personal, just protecting both our interests. As I read through page after page of legal language, I realized this wasn't a marriage proposal. It was a business merger. The prenup wasn't just about money. It was about control. Where we'd live, how we'd manage our finances, what would happen if we had children. My career was mentioned as something I'd likely discontinue after marriage. My friends were referred to as potentially problematic influences. Even my relationship with my own family was subject to his approval. When I asked him about these clauses, he seemed genuinely surprised that I was upset. This was how things worked in his world, he explained. Marriages needed structure, boundaries, clear expectations. He wasn't trying to control me. He was trying to protect us both from the complications that money could bring. But as I sat there holding that beautiful, heavy ring, I realized he was asking me to sign away the very things that made me who I was. My independence, my career, my voice in my own life. The price of his love was becoming someone else entirely. The breaking point came 6 months later when I got offered the promotion I'd been working toward for 3 years. Head nurse in the cardiac unit, more responsibility, better pay, and the chance to make real changes in patient care. I was over the moon until I told him about it at dinner. His face went cold in a way I'd never seen before. "You can't be serious," he said, setting down his fork like the conversation was already over. We're getting married in 8 months. Why would you want to take on more stress when you should be focusing on our life together? I tried to explain what this promotion meant to me, how I'd worked for it, how it represented everything I'd dreamed of professionally. But he kept interrupting with practical concerns. The long hours would interfere with our social obligations. The stress would affect my health. The salary was meaningless compared to what he could provide. Why did I need to prove myself when I was already successful as his fiancée? That's when he said the words that changed everything. You have to choose. This promotion or our marriage. You can't have both. The ultimatum hung in the air between us like a challenge. In his mind, it was simple logic. He could give me everything I'd ever need: security, luxury, comfort. Why would I choose the stress and uncertainty of a demanding career when I could have a life of ease? He genuinely couldn't understand why I'd want to work when I didn't have to. But for me, it wasn't about the money or even the title. It was about being valued for my skills, my dedication, my ability to heal people. It was about having a purpose beyond being someone's beautiful accessory. It was about knowing that I mattered for what I could do, not just for who I was sleeping with. As I looked at him across that dinner table, I realized we were speaking completely different languages. He saw love as providing and protecting. I saw it as supporting and encouraging. He wanted to keep me safe from the world. I wanted to engage with it. And for the first time, I wondered if love was enough to bridge that gap. I took the promotion, and for 2 weeks, I didn't tell him. I went to work every day, threw myself into the new responsibilities, and came home pretending nothing had changed. But the weight of the secret was eating me alive, and I knew I was just postponing the inevitable. When I finally told him, we had the fight that ended everything. He accused me of betraying him, of choosing strangers over our relationship, of being too stubborn to accept the life he was offering. I accused him of trying to control me, of never really loving who I was, of wanting a trophy wife instead of a partner. You don't understand, he kept saying. I'm trying to take care of you. I'm trying to give you everything. But I never asked for everything, I shot back. I asked for respect. I asked for support. I asked you to love me enough to let me be myself. The conversation went in circles for hours. He couldn't understand why I'd choose struggle over comfort, why I'd pick a stressful job over a life of leisure. I couldn't make him see that without my work, without my purpose, without the parts of myself I'd worked so hard to build, I wouldn't be the woman he claimed to love. Finally, exhausted and heartbroken, I said the words that had been building inside me for months. I can't marry you. The silence that followed was deafening. He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language, like the words couldn't possibly mean what they clearly meant. Then came the anger, the disbelief, the desperate attempts to negotiate. He offered me more money, more freedom, more compromise. But by then, I knew the truth. Real love doesn't come with conditions, and I'd been trying to earn something that should have been freely given. As I slipped that beautiful, heavy ring off my finger and placed it on the table between us, I felt like I was breaking both our hearts. But I also felt something else: relief. For the first time in months, I could breathe. Walking away from millions of dollars is harder than you'd think, not because of the money itself, but because of everyone else's reaction to losing it. My family thought I'd lost my mind. "Do you know what you just threw away?" my mum asked, her voice breaking like I'd personally destroyed her dreams too. My sister stopped speaking to me for weeks, convinced I'd ruined the family's one shot at financial security. The media attention was brutal. Somehow the story leaked. Nurse breaks up with billionaire, and suddenly I was painted as either crazy or calculating. Half the articles called me an idiot for walking away from the good life. The other half suggested I was holding out for more money, playing hard to get for a bigger payout. Nobody seemed to consider that I might have had actual reasons for leaving. Moving back to my tiny apartment felt like reverse culture shock. After months of marble countertops and rooms bigger than my entire place, everything felt cramped and shabby. The faucet that dripped, the neighbor's TV that was too loud, the radiator that clanged all night. All the things I'd forgotten about real life came flooding back. But the hardest part was the loneliness. Not just missing him, though I did desperately, but realizing how isolated I'd become. I'd lost touch with most of my friends while living in his world. My coworkers were awkward around me, not sure how to act around someone who'd been in the papers. I felt caught between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. He tried to win me back, of course. Flowers arrived daily, each arrangement more elaborate than the last. He'd have my favorite coffee delivered to the hospital, with notes begging me to reconsider. Once he showed up at my apartment at midnight, looking destroyed, asking what he could change to make me stay. But the saddest part was that he still didn't understand what had gone wrong. He kept offering more money, more security, more comfort. Everything except the one thing I actually needed, respect for who I was. Rebuilding your life after almost losing yourself is like physical therapy for your soul. Slow, sometimes painful, but ultimately strengthening. I threw myself back into work with the intensity that surprised everyone, including me. The cardiac unit became my sanctuary, a place where my skills mattered more than my relationship status or bank account. My first day back to normal felt strange. Wearing scrubs instead of designer clothes, taking the bus instead of being driven, eating cafeteria food instead of five-star meals. But there was something liberating about it too. Every decision was mine again. What to eat, where to go, how to spend my time. I'd forgotten how good it felt to choose. Slowly, I started reconnecting with the friends I'd neglected. Maya and I began having our weekly lunches again, and she never once said, "I told you so," even though she had every right to. We'd talk for hours about everything I'd missed. Her new relationship, changes at work, movies I should catch up on. Normal stuff that felt revolutionary after months of charity galas and business dinners. Dating again was terrifying. How do you explain to someone that you'd rather split the check at a diner than be taken to an expensive restaurant you didn't choose? How do you trust your own judgment about someone's intentions when you'd been so wrong before? I went on a few awkward coffee dates with guys who either wanted to hear every detail about my famous ex or were intimidated by the whole story. But gradually, I started to remember who I was before I became half of a power couple. The woman who chose nursing because she wanted to help people, who read mystery novels until 2 a.m., who could make her grandmother's recipe for cornbread from memory, who laughed too loud at her own jokes and cried during commercials with dogs in them. All the small, ordinary parts of myself that had gotten lost in the luxury. 3 years later, I can finally see the whole picture clearly. What I learned isn't just about him or about money or about love. It's about the difference between being cherished and being controlled, between being provided for and being valued. Real love, I discovered, doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't require you to give up your dreams to make room for someone else's vision of your life. It doesn't come with contracts and conditions and clauses about who you're allowed to be. Real love sees you completely, your ambitions, your flaws, your stubborn independence, and says, yes, this, all of this. I learned that financial security isn't worth losing yourself, no matter how appealing it looks from the outside. Money can solve a lot of problems, but it can't fix a relationship built on the wrong foundation. All the luxury in the world can't make up for feeling like a stranger in your own life. But I also learned something unexpected. I was stronger than I thought. Walking away from everything that looked perfect to find what was actually right took a courage I didn't know I had. Every day I chose the harder path over the easier one was a day I chose myself. And that choice, repeated over and over, built something in me that no amount of money could buy: unshakable self-respect. I learned that other people's disappointment in your choices says more about their fears than your mistakes. My family eventually came around, proud of the woman I'd become, instead of resentful about the life I'd given up. The friends who really mattered stuck around through the mess, and the media attention, and the awkward phase of figuring out who I was again. Most importantly, I learned that you can love someone deeply and still know they're wrong for you. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let go. That breaking someone's heart, even your own, can be an act of kindness if staying would slowly destroy you both. Love isn't always enough, and that's not a failure of love. It's just the truth. Today, I woke up in a house I bought with my own money, in a bed I chose, next to a man who celebrates my promotions instead of seeing them as competition for his attention. It's a smaller house than the mansion, a simpler life than the one I walked away from, but it's mine in a way that Penthouse never was. I'm the chief nursing officer now at a different hospital, one that specializes in cardiac care for underserved communities. The irony isn't lost on me. I'm literally helping heal hearts for a living. The work is demanding, the hours are long, and some days I come home exhausted and covered in other people's problems. But when I save a life, when I train a new nurse, when I implement a program that actually makes a difference, I remember why I chose this path over the easier one. My current relationship couldn't be more different from what I had before. Kevin is a social worker who drives a 10-year-old Honda and thinks a fancy dinner is trying that new Thai place downtown. When I told him about my past, he listened without judgment and then said, "That must have been really hard to walk away from." Not the money, the situation. He understood that the difficult part wasn't leaving wealth behind, but leaving someone I'd loved. We split everything 50-50, not because we're keeping score, but because partnership means equality. He supports my career ambitions the same way I support his. When he got offered a position that would require us to relocate, we talked about it for weeks, weighing pros and cons together. No ultimatums, no power plays, just two people figuring out life as a team. As for my billionaire, I heard through mutual acquaintances that he married someone else 2 years ago. A socialite who fits perfectly into his world, who hosts dinner parties and chairs charity boards, and looks stunning in photos. I genuinely hope he's happy. I hope he found someone who wanted the life he was offering, because that life deserves someone who chooses it freely. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed, if I'd signed that prenup and given up my career and become the woman he wanted me to be. Would I have been happy? Would the luxury have eventually made up for the loss of myself? I'll never know, and I'm grateful for that uncertainty. Some doors are meant to stay closed, some paths are meant to remain untaken. The girl who saved a billionaire's life learned something more valuable than money in the end. She learned to save herself. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from what looks perfect to find what's actually right for you. Hit subscribe for more real stories about love, life, and finding your worth. And remember, you are never just someone's accessory. You are the main character of your own story.